A Water Droplet's Journey by Miss Bennett. Our story begins on a cold winter's day. A small water droplet was looking down at the world below from his lovely home in the cloud when he began to feel very cold. As he got colder, he began to freeze. As he froze, he began to get heavier, too heavy, in fact, for the cloud to hold him any longer, and he toppled out of the cloud. As he fell, he realized that he was no longer a water droplet. No, instead he was a beautiful, delicate snowflake falling from the sky to the earth below. A gust of wind carried him through the air where he twisted and swirled in a sort of dance until he fell onto a frozen pond in a mountain valley. The little snowflake froze to the rest of the icy particles, and there he stayed for some time. One day the sun began to rise and the world around the little snowflake became warmer. The weather was changing as spring had arrived. With the warmth of the sun, the pond and our little snowflake began to melt until he was once again a water droplet. The pond began to overflow with the amount of water droplets that had melted, and soon our little water droplet found himself flowing in a growing stream farther and farther from the pond. After what felt like a very long journey, the stream reached a large raging river. The droplet was carried by the river through cities and under bridges until he reached the wide, open ocean. The little water droplet could not believe how big of a place the ocean was. He had never been around so many other water droplets. After a few days of floating around the ocean, seeing many different creatures, and meeting many other droplets, he began to feel a strange sensation. The sun was out and he was beginning to feel very hot. He noticed that other water droplets were complaining about the heat too, when suddenly the droplet beside him began to rise into the air. He couldn't believe it, and he had no idea what to do to help his neighbor. Just as he was beginning to think up a plan to save him, he too began to feel as if he were light as air. In fact, that was just what he had become. He had become so hot that he had changed states yet again and now found himself flying through the air as air itself. He was water vapor, and he loved the feeling. He was soaring through the sky high above the ocean and flying over land when he began to feel a bit chilly. He was getting too high in the air to remain water vapor. He could feel himself getting heavier by the second until suddenly he was a water droplet again. He had condensed and was forming into a cloud with many other water droplets that had made the same change. Being back in the cloud, the water droplet felt like he had returned home. It was nice here, floating in the air looking down at the world below. He liked this feeling the best, but he also began to miss the ocean and the feeling of the tide and being up close to the fish and other creatures in the sea. He wondered if he would ever get the chance to return. More and more water droplets joined in his cloud until it began to get very crowded and almost too full. And the next moment, the little water droplet found himself rocketing out of the cloud in the form of rain. He was a liquid again, plummeting through the sky to the world below. This time, however, he found himself in a reservoir where the water droplets are taken through different filters and pipes to be cleaned and used as tap water in people's homes. After a journey through some of these cold, dark, spooky pipes and a real good cleaning, our little water droplet found himself falling from a tap into a young girl's bathroom sink. She was dipping her hands into the water and caught the little water droplet and lifted him to her cheeks to wash her face. He dripped off her cheek towards her chin and fell into the sink and down the drain. Through more pitch-black, creaking pipes he slid until suddenly the droplet poured out back into the ocean. He met new fish and saw more creatures like seals and crabs. He was very excited to be back in the open water where he could drift around carefree, flowing in and out with the tide. He was beginning to get comfortable being in the sea again when the sun peeked through the clouds and began to warm up the droplets on the surface of the water. It was a strange sensation to feel like air, but the little droplet once again began to evaporate and rise higher and higher into the air. "I quite like being a water droplet," our little water droplet friend said. "So many adventures and never sitting still. What an exciting life! I wonder where I will end up next time around." Story inspired by The Snowflake, a water cycle story by Neil Waldman. Illustrations done using Drawing Desk.